Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily. That's what we're calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. The poems contained in numerical order in the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 155, The Murmur of a Bee. It's a fascinating, fascinating little poem. When it was published in 1890, it was actually titled Why. Of course, Emily never titling any of her poetry. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm very hopeful that you've already had exposure to our set of introductory comments. I'm also hopeful that you've worked with the preceding 154 poems we just finished with, except to heaven she is not. Now here we have another nature tribute poem, no doubt, but we've also got Emily's theology and the question of the pantheism that will remind us of Spinoza, for example, that God's everywhere. And her phrase, that's all, is the one that we're really going to focus on in this reading of 155. By the way, notice her use of the term witchcraft. She, of course, knew that that was a loaded term, and we'll even talk about how she uses it in her poetry. The murmur of a bee, a witchcraft, yieldeth me. If any ask why, 'twere easier to die than tell. The red upon the hill taketh away my will. If anybody sneer, take care, for God is here, that's all. The breaking of the day addeth to my degree. If any ask me how, artist, who drew me so, must tell. Now I find this a fascinating analysis of the question of where is God? Again, the question of why is central to the publishing of this poem in 1890. Notice, she begins with the murmur, she ends with tell. And I love that about Emily. She's willing to play the game of the translinguistic, as we have often referred to it in 303. Things that can't be said, Emily's like, I'll give it a shot, I'll give it a shot. Notice, it's the murmur of a bee, just the hum of a bee. A witchcraft yieldeth me. Now, witchcraft is fascinating here, used in 593, 776, 1046, 1158. But there's two times that she uses it for sure I want us to concentrate on right now. In poem 1583, she'll say it this way, and I find this interesting, her use of it in 1583. Witchcraft was hung in history, but history and I find all the witchcraft that we need around us every day. Now when we meet that poem, we'll come back to this poem and her use of witchcraft. How about this one in 1708? She says it this way, witchcraft has not a pedigree, 'tis early as our breath, and mourners meet it going out the moment of our death. Many have argued that Emily is as much pagan as she is Christian, and here playing with the word witchcraft, of course, with Salem behind her and all of that makes some sense. She says, the murmur of a bee, a witchcraft, yieldeth me, and later it will be degreed. If any ask me, why? In other words, if somebody were to, if she were to say to somebody, all I need is the murmur of a bee, you'll remember that Whitman expresses something similar in Song of Myself, passage 48. We've given full lectures in our Talks with Walt, where we did all the poetry of the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. Do you remember in passage 48, to glance with an eye or show a bean in its pod confounds the learning of all time? I think Emily is playing a very similar game to Walt here. If anybody were to ask me, all I need is the hum of a bee. If anybody were to ask me, 'twere easier to die than tell. Notice, tell is, again, the last word of this poem. In other words, there are things I'm going to have to say I just don't know other than to say, that's all I know. This is, of course, the fallibilist position to some degree epistemologically, back to our introductory set of comments. That is to say, I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. She says, this is all I can say about it. Then in a passage that's been often referenced as a possible tribute to Spinoza and his pantheism from his ethics, the red upon the hill, and some have made comments, my Emily group has wanted to point out the color of red. The red upon the hill taketh away my will. Now, this is something fascinating. In poem 445, when we get there, she'll play the game this way in poem 445. She'll say it this way, I thought how yellow it would look when Richard went to mill, and then I wanted to get out, but something held my will. This idea of taking away my will. In other words, I'm lost in the hum of a bee. It just blows my mind. There's nothing, I mean, what am I going to do other than just give up my will to it? I'm so stunned by it. It taketh away my will. If anybody sneer, now it's interesting, this use of the word sneer. We'll see it in poem 271 and 289. But I'm interested in her use of it in poem 1555. In poem 1555, she plays it this way. I groped for him before I knew with solemn nameless need. All other bounties sudden chafe for this foreshadowed food, which others taste and spurn and sneer, though I within suppose that consecrated it could be the only food that grows. This notion of sneering. I think that Emily believed that there was a lot of sneering that possibly went on. Connect this back to the poem 154 that we just read, where she maybe is not and unnoticed, and there might be sneering. In other words, theologians might sneer at what I'm having to say. However, notice, she speaks directly to them with this phrase, take care, for God is here. By the way, that's the only use in all of her poetry of that phrase, God is here. And then, that's all. Now, in poem 703, when we get to poem 703, we'll play the game of that's all again. She says, blue is blue, the world through, amber, amber, dew, seek, friend, and see. Heaven is shy of earth, that's all. Bashful heaven, thy lover small, hide to from thee. I think there's a whole lot going on with this phrase, that's all. In other words, if she's speaking directly to those who would sneer at her for her quasi-pantheistic Spinozian pantheism, I think her argument is, this is all I need. That's all anybody needs. And it might very well be that really what she's doing here is channeling Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty, that's all you know on earth, and all you need to know. Go back and look at our lectures at Learn Strong on that poem as well. That's all. And then we're back to it. The breaking of the day, of course, sunrise. My Emily group pointing out that probably she's channeling here Psalm 46:5, and I love that my group made that connection. The breaking of the day addeth to my degree. Now, of course, degree and yieldeth me plays against each other. I think she's speaking to theologians who have their degrees. In other words, I don't have a degree, she's saying, but all the degree I need is a sunrise. If any ask me how, right, how is it that this is all? Then she goes to the word artist, who drew me so. Obviously here we're back to the Psalms, I'm wonderfully made and all of that. Of course here probably artist is deity. Who drew me so must tell. Again, it's translinguistic. In other words, there's no way for me to explain it all. Again, we begin with a murmur and we end with telling. What are we going to say about this poem at 2a? Well, I think her argument is that there really isn't any way to ultimately explain the power of nature. I think she learned a lot of this from her essay specifically by Emerson called Nature. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. At 2b, I love her word choice, beginning with murmur and ending with tell. And I love when we get to poem 575, when we study this poem again later on, I'm going to love doing this again with you, but just hear the power of this little poem 575 as we finish. Heaven has different signs to me. Sometimes I think that noon is but a symbol of the place, and when again at dawn a mighty look runs around the world and settles in the hills, and awe, if it should be like that, upon the ignorant steals. The orchard when the sun is on, the triumph of the birds when they together victory make, some carnivals of clouds, the rapture of a finished day returning to the west. All these remind us of the place that men call paradise. Itself be fairer, we suppose, but how ourselves shall be, adorned for a superior grace, not yet our eyes can see. Of course, a poem like this has the backing of Emerson, as we mentioned, and Thoreau and Whitman, no doubt. At 3b, what was a time in your life when nature took away your will and you whispered, that's all? Some of us will say, it's kind of the way we feel about any number of these Emily poems, huh? Thank you.